In a world moving faster than ever before, where technology, culture, and human ambition intertwine, one question continues to echo across generations. What does it truly mean to grow, to adapt, and to create a future worth living in? This journey isn't just about progress. It's about the struggles, the resilience, and the untold stories that shape our collective path forward. Imagine standing at the edge of possibility, where every choice opens a new door, every challenge sharpens our vision, and every breakthrough redefines what we once thought was impossible. What if Shisui Uchiha never died? What if the man they called Shisui of the body flicker lived long enough to wear the Hokage's cloak? In the original Naruto story, Shisui is a legend, a ghost of what could have been. Respected by the Uchiha, trusted by Hiruzen, loved by Itachi, and feared by Danzo. But fate was cruel. Danzo ambushed him, one eye stolen, and in despair, Shisui ended his own life. But let's change that. Let's imagine a world where Shisui survived, a world where he rose to power, and one day became Hokage. Before we build that world, we need to remember who Shisui really was. Shisui wasn't just another Uchiha. He was different. Where most of his clan carried pride, Shisui carried humility. Where others burned with anger, Shisui sought peace. And yet, make no mistake, he was one of the strongest Uchiha in history. They called him the body flicker. A shinobi so fast, enemies barely saw him move before falling. He was Anbu elite, trusted on missions most wouldn't survive. But his true power, his eyes. Shisui's Mangekyo Sharingan gave him Kotoa Matsukami, a genjutsu so powerful, so subtle, that it could rewrite your thoughts. And you'd never know it happened. Think about that. No flashy illusions. No breaking free. Just a quiet shift in your will. That's why Danzo wanted his eyes. That's why his death shattered Itachi. And that's why, if Shisui lived, the story of Naruto changes forever. So, how does Shisui survive? There are a few ways this could have happened. 1. Danzo fails. Shisui, with his legendary speed, escapes the ambush, both eyes intact. 2. Itachi intervenes. He saves Shisui before the root can finish the job. 3. Hiruzen himself steps in, catching wind of Danzo's plot. For this what if, let's take the first path. Danzo fails. Shisui escapes. He's injured, but alive. And, in that moment, history splits. Because instead of fading into legend, Shisui is still there. Still fighting for peace. Still ready to use his influence to save his clan and his village. Now, let's look at the fallout. The Uchiha coup. The darkest cloud hanging over Konoha. In the real timeline, Shisui was gone, and with him, the last chance to prevent bloodshed. Itachi was forced into the impossible. Massacre his clan, or watch the village burn. But in this timeline, Shisui lives. He still has Kotoa Matsukami. He still has the trust of Hiruzen. And, maybe most important, he has the respect of Fugaku, the Uchiha head. That matters. Because unlike others in the clan, Shisui wasn't seen as weak. He was powerful, respected, a shinobi whose words carried weight. So when he speaks against rebellion, people listen. And on the other side, the village leadership trusts him too. Hiruzen sees him as a voice of reason, Even the elders, though wary, can't deny his skill. This is where the bridge is built. Shisui mediates. He convinces Fugaku to delay. He persuades Hiruzen to listen, and little by little, the tension begins to ease. Most importantly, Itachi is spared. No massacre, no blood on his hands. Instead of being a double agent in Akatsuki, he remains a loyal protector of Konoha. And Sasuke. He grows up with a brother unbroken by guilt. The seeds of hatred never take root. This single change reshapes everything. But surviving isn't enough. How does Shisui go from Anbu prodigy to Hokage? Here's how. First, his survival earns him fame. The Uchiha don't rebel. The village isn't torn apart. And the man responsible? Shisui Uchiha. To the clan, he's a savior. To the village, he's a hero. Second, his ideals match the Hokage spirit. Shisui is humble, loyal, and wise beyond his years. He isn't power-hungry. He doesn't crave glory. He just wants peace. Third, he has allies. Hiruzen supports him. Itachi stands at his side. And without the massacre, the Uchiha's reputation slowly heals. Meanwhile, Danzo. His failure to eliminate Shisui cripples his influence. Root is weakened. The elders begin to shift toward Shisui's vision. So when Hiruzen finally steps down, who better than Shisui? He's strong, he's respected, he's the living symbol of unity. And so, Shisui Uchiha becomes the 6th Hokage. Picture that moment. The Hokage's cloak draped over Shisui's shoulders. The Uchiha crest on his back. The village gathered, watching in silence. For the first time in history, an Uchiha takes the Hokage seat. It's more than politics. It's a symbol. A symbol that the cycle of hatred can be broken. That Uchiha and Senju, once bitter enemies, are now one. That the leaf can heal old wounds. And, under Shisui's leadership, things change fast. The Uchiha aren't isolated in the police force anymore. They're integrated into leadership roles. Naruto, still a young boy at this time, is acknowledged earlier, guided by a Hokage who sees potential in him, not just the burden of the Nine Tails. And the village feels secure, because with Shisui's speed, his genjutsu, and his wisdom, who would dare threaten Konoha? And so, in this alternate timeline, Shisui doesn't vanish into tragedy. He doesn't drown in the Naka River. He rises. From Anbu captain, to clan savior, to the unifying Hokage. But this is only the beginning. Because the question remains. With Shisui as Hokage, what happens to Akatsuki? What happens to Naruto's path? And when the 4th Great Ninja War arrives, does the world even stand a chance against Kotoa Matsukami? That's what we'll explore next. The Uchiha clan, the proudest and perhaps most tragic family in the history of Konoha. For decades they carried the burden of suspicion, the curse of power, the fear of rebellion. And in the original story, that suspicion turned to blood. Itachi, with tears in his eyes, slaughtered his clan in one night, leaving only Sasuke alive. But in our timeline, Shisui survives, and with him alive, the massacre never happens. Instead, we witness something the ninja world never thought possible. An Uchiha clan, at peace with the village. But how does Shisui pull this off? And what does it mean for the future of the leaf? Let's dive in. To understand how Shisui prevents disaster, we need to understand the why behind the Uchiha rebellion. The Uchiha clan weren't just another group in the village. They were one of the founding pillars of Konoha. The Sharingan made them feared. Their role in battle made them legendary. But power breeds fear. After the Nine Tails attacked the village, suspicion fell directly on the Uchiha. Many believed the Sharingan had controlled the beast. And while this wasn't true, the damage was done. The Uchiha were segregated, moved to the outskirts of the village, watched closely, distrusted. Imagine being told, "You are one of the strongest clans in existence, but we don't trust you. You will live apart. You will serve only as police." Resentment built. Fugaku Uchiha, their leader, listened to his people's anger, and in secret, a plan was born. A coup. A rebellion against the leaf. In canon, only Itachi and Shisui stood in the middle. Both young, both loyal to the village, both torn between love for their clan and duty to Konoha. But when Shisui died, Itachi was left alone, and we know how that ended. Now, in our alternate timeline, Shisui lives, and that changes everything. Shisui isn't just another Uchiha. He's one of their brightest stars. When he speaks, people listen, not only because of his skill, but because of his heart. Unlike some Uchiha who drowned in arrogance, Shisui had humility. He wasn't prideful, he wasn't vengeful, and that made him persuasive. He could walk into the Uchiha compound and speak of peace without sounding weak. He could stand before Fugaku and say, "We can find another way." And here's the key. Fugaku respected him. Yes, Fugaku was a stern leader, and yes, he believed rebellion might be their only path. But even in canon, Fugaku showed restraint when speaking with Itachi and Shisui. He wasn't blind to reason. So imagine Shisui, alive, standing in the clan meetings, using his influence, calming the most radical voices, and reminding the Uchiha that civil war would destroy them. With his genjutsu, Koto Amatsukami, he also carried a secret weapon. He could, if absolutely necessary, bend Fugaku's will. He could make him choose peace, and Fugaku would never know. This is important, because Shisui never wanted to use his eye carelessly, but if it meant saving both the clan and the village, he would. Inside the clan, Shisui had respect, but outside, he had something even more valuable: trust. Hiruzen Sarutobi believed in Shisui. He saw him as a shinobi of peace, a boy wise beyond his years. Itachi trusted him like a brother. Even the elders, though suspicious, couldn't deny his loyalty. This made Shisui unique. He could walk between two worlds, the Uchiha compound, full of anger and pride, and the Hokage's office, full of suspicion and fear. And he could speak to both, as a mediator, as a bridge. In our timeline, this bridge never collapsed. So, how exactly does Shisui prevent the coup? It doesn't happen overnight. He works in small steps. First, he convinces Fugaku to delay action. He warns him that rebellion would lead to annihilation. He explains that the village is stronger than the clan realizes, and that a civil war would only wipe out the Uchiha bloodline. Fugaku, though frustrated, listens. Next, Shisui appeals to Hiruzen. He asks for reforms, small ones, to rebuild trust. More Uchiha in leadership positions, greater involvement outside the police force, less isolation. Hiruzen, unlike Danzo, is willing to compromise. Slowly, tension eases. Not gone, but managed. The Uchiha feel heard. The village feels secure. And the coup never takes place. This is where the timeline truly changes. In canon, Itachi was forced into an impossible position. Slaughter his clan, or watch the village fall into war. That choice broke him. It defined his life. But in our timeline, that burden never lands on his shoulders. Shisui stands with him. Together they protect both sides. And Itachi is free. He doesn't join Akatsuki. He doesn't spend his life as a double agent. Instead, he grows into one of Konoha's greatest defenders, alongside Shisui. The bond between them, already deep, becomes legendary. Two prodigies, two heroes, united not by tragedy, but by victory. And Sasuke. He grows up differently too. Instead of chasing vengeance, he sees a brother admired, not feared. Instead of living in hatred, he lives in hope. The ripple effect is massive, but not everyone accepts this peace. Danzo Shimura. In canon, Danzo was the shadow of Konoha, always lurking, always scheming. And to him, the Uchiha were a threat that needed to be eliminated. Even with Shisui alive, Danzo wouldn't stop plotting. But here's the difference. Shisui knows him. He knows Danzo's lust for power, and after the attempted eye theft, he never trusts him again. So what happens? Danzo loses. Shisui exposes him. Hiruzen, though reluctant, finally sees the truth. Root is weakened. Danzo's grip slips away. And for the first time in decades, the Uchiha are free from the shadows that hunted them. With the clan intact, the village grows stronger. Think about it. No massacre. No orphan Sasuke burning for revenge. No Itachi living as a broken double agent. No Danzo growing unchecked in the dark. Instead, Konoha gains. Shisui and Itachi, two of the strongest Uchiha, loyal to the Hokage. The full strength of the Uchiha clan, no longer isolated. A symbol of unity, bridging one of the oldest divides. This isn't just about preventing tragedy. It's about building a future where the leaf enters the Akatsuki era more prepared, more stable, and more united than ever before. At the heart of all this is Shisui. Because the Uchiha story has always been one of cycles. Pride, hatred, tragedy. From Madara and Hashirama to Itachi and Sasuke. But Shisui breaks that cycle. He becomes the living proof that an Uchiha can be more than vengeance. That an Uchiha can lead not through fear, but through compassion. And when he eventually rises to Hokage, his survival of the coup isn't just luck. It's destiny. So, what if Shisui prevented the Uchiha coup? Then the massacre never happens. Itachi is free, Sasuke is whole, Danzo is weakened, and Konoha stands united. This single change creates a ripple that shakes the entire Naruto timeline. But unity within the leaf doesn't mean the world outside is safe. Because Akatsuki is still rising, and the storms of war are still on the horizon. So, the next question is, with Shisui as Hokage and the Uchiha clan alive, how does Konoha face the Akatsuki? That is what we'll explore in the next section. So, We've seen how Shisui could rise to power, and how his influence might stop the Uchiha coup before it even began. But now, let's step into the real heart of this story. What would the world actually look like under a Hokage Shisui Uchiha? Shisui was never the kind of shinobi who sought power for himself. Unlike Danzo, unlike Orochimaru, unlike even the pride of the Uchiha clan, Shisui's greatest weapon wasn't his Sharingan. It was his ability to listen, to understand, to empathize. As Hokage, his first move wouldn't be commanding armies or drafting strict policies. Instead, he'd focus on what no Hokage had done properly before, healing the rift between clans inside the village itself. Imagine the Hokage's office, not filled with endless mission scrolls, but with clan heads, Hyuga elders, Inuzuka leaders, Aburame tacticians, Nara strategists, and, of course, the Uchiha. Shisui would make sure every clan had a seat at the table. It wouldn't be democracy in the modern sense, but it would be representation. And that changes everything. Under Shisui, the Uchiha police force would no longer feel like a tool of oppression kept on the outskirts of the village. Instead, they'd be woven directly into Konoha's structure. Think about it. For decades, the Uchiha were mistrusted, seen as dangerous, prideful, too powerful to be left unchecked. That fear was what fueled the coup in the first place. But as Hokage, Shisui would flip that script. He'd turn the Uchiha into symbols of trust. Uchiha shinobi, patrolling side by side with the Hyuga. Uchiha children entering the academy, no longer whispered about as traitors in waiting. And Itachi wouldn't be burdened with choosing between family and village. He'd become what he always wanted to be, the perfect protector, free from blood on his hands. But let's be real. There's one man who wouldn't take this lightly. Danzo Shimura. In the original timeline, Danzo thrived in the shadows, manipulating, scheming, and building Root into a private army. But under Shisui's leadership, Root would face a wall. Remember, Shisui already had Danzo cornered before. He nearly lost his eye to him. As Hokage, Shisui would make sure Danzo never got close again. Would Shisui outright dismantle Root? Maybe, or maybe, in true Shisui fashion, he'd reform it, forcing Danzo into the light. And this is critical, because without Danzo pulling strings, the tragedies of the next generation, the Uchiha massacre, the broken childhood of Naruto, the betrayal of Sasuke, would all unravel differently. Now let's zoom out, because while Shisui may stabilize Konoha internally, the outside world is brewing storms. The Akatsuki are rising. Nagato, Konan, Obito in the shadows. The seeds of chaos are already planted. But here's the twist. Shisui was known across nations as the Shisui of the body flicker. His speed, his intellect, and his genjutsu made him a living legend. As Hokage, his reputation would send ripples across every village. Would Nagato see him as a threat? Absolutely. Would Obito's plans, rooted in manipulating Itachi and Sasuke, fall apart without the Uchiha massacre? Completely. That means the Akatsuki as we know it wouldn't form in the same way. Without Sasuke's hatred to weaponize, without Itachi's tragic double life as a spy, Obito's Eye of the Moon plan would weaken. But make no mistake, Obito wouldn't vanish. He'd shift strategies, and that brings us to the fourth great ninja war. Let's pause for a moment and talk about Naruto. In the original story, Naruto grew up hated, feared as the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, ignored by villagers, left without guidance. But under Shisui's leadership, that changes. Why? Because Shisui knew the pain of being distrusted. He understood what it meant to carry a burden, and he would never, ever let another child suffer that way. Naruto would grow up differently, not the lonely prankster, but a boy guided directly by the Hokage himself. Imagine that. Naruto being mentored by Shisui, trained not only in combat, but in understanding the balance of power, the weight of leadership. By the time he was a teenager, Naruto wouldn't just dream of becoming Hokage, he'd be groomed for it. So what happens when the world edges toward the fourth great ninja war? Obito still gathers tailed beasts. Nagato still wages his war against the shinobi system. But the alliances look different. Instead of fractured trust, the 5 Kage summit would see a younger, unshakable Shisui leading Konoha, one who can command with both power and compassion. Picture the battlefield, not Tsunade, but Shisui, flashing across the front lines, his Sharingan casting illusions that disarm armies without spilling blood, his diplomacy forging bonds between sand, stone, cloud, and mist that no other Hokage could. And in the shadows, Naruto and Sasuke, no longer enemies, but brothers in arms, standing ready to end the cycle of hatred once and for all. In the end, what makes this story so powerful isn't the battles Shisui would win. It's the tragedies he would prevent. No Uchiha massacre. No Sasuke consumed by revenge. No Itachi forced into darkness. No Naruto growing up unloved. Shisui's era as Hokage would be remembered not as one of war, but as the time when peace wasn't just a dream. It was reality. And maybe, just maybe, the shinobi world wouldn't be defined by cycles of hatred, but by cycles of understanding. Because at the heart of Shisui's philosophy was always the same belief, that sometimes the greatest power isn't destroying your enemies, it's saving them. Imagine a world where Shisui Uchiha, the prodigy famed for his speed, wisdom, and loyalty, not only survived, but rose to become the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. The implications of this shift are massive, reshaping not just Konoha's destiny, but also the entire shinobi world. This isn't simply about power, it's about ideology, leadership, and how one man's choices could have rewritten the fate of generations. So, let's dive deep into this alternate history. Shisui was unlike most Uchiha. While many in his clan carried simmering resentment against the village, Shisui believed in peace above all. He loved the leaf genuinely, to the point of being ready to sacrifice everything to protect it. He wasn't blind to the discrimination his clan faced, nor was he ignorant of the darkness lurking in the system. But his approach was uniquely balanced, neither consumed by revenge like many Uchiha, nor dismissive of his clan's pain like certain leaf elders. Instead, he sought harmony. That very mindset is what makes him such a fascinating candidate for Hokage. If he had lived, if he had convinced the Uchiha and the higher-ups to trust in his vision, things would have unfolded very differently. Becoming Hokage would not have been an easy path for Shisui. Unlike Itachi, who was still far too young at the time, Shisui was seasoned enough to command respect. His prowess on the battlefield, his speed, and above all, his Mangekyo Sharingan with the fearsome Koto Amatsukami gave him leverage in negotiations with both his clan and the village elders. He had the charisma to unite, the power to enforce, and the wisdom to restrain himself from tyranny. Imagine Shisui in that role, standing between Fugaku and the council, preventing the coup not through bloodshed, but through diplomacy, backed by his overwhelming skill. The Uchiha coup itself would likely never reach the point of escalation under Shisui's leadership. Instead of Itachi bearing the crushing burden of betraying his clan, Shisui would use his influence to de-escalate tensions. His closeness with Itachi would allow him to mentor the younger Uchiha in diplomacy rather than forcing him into the shadows of Aienbu assassination. More importantly, the cycle of hatred within the clan would start to break. By being the bridge between the Uchiha and the rest of the village, Shisui could have dismantled the long-standing mistrust that had been festering since the founding of Konoha. But the world outside Konoha wouldn't stand still. Other villages would view Shisui's rise with both awe and suspicion. His reputation as Shisui of the Body Flicker was already legendary, and his ascendancy to Hokage would immediately send ripples across the shinobi nations. The cloud, the stone, the sand, and even the mist would have to recalculate their strategies. They wouldn't just be facing the Leaf Village anymore. They would be facing a Hokage with the most subtle yet terrifying genjutsu in existence. The political balance would shift, and war might even be avoided simply because no one would want to gamble against Kotoa Matsukami. Internally, Shisui would also reshape Konoha's leadership style. Unlike Hiruzen and Sarutobi, who often hesitated and allowed the elders too much control, Shisui would challenge the system. He respected authority but wasn't afraid to call out corruption. Danzo, in particular, would no longer be free to manipulate from the shadows. Remember, Shisui already distrusted Danzo and tried to stop him from abusing his power. As Hokage, Shisui would expose and dismantle Root, stripping Danzo of his clandestine influence. This would mean no secret experiments on children, no manipulation of future shinobi like Sai, and no unchecked militarization that constantly pushed Konoha toward authoritarianism. Now think about the Ninetales incident. In the original timeline, the Uchiha were blamed for the attack even though it was orchestrated by Obito. That blame became one of the major catalysts for the coup. Under Shisui, this narrative could have been confronted directly. His genjutsu abilities and investigative prowess might have revealed the truth, that an outsider was responsible. Exposing Obito, or at least eliminating suspicion against his clan, would have lifted a massive weight from the Uchiha's shoulders. This could prevent decades of bitterness and distrust within the village. The personal lives of key characters would also transform under Shisui's rule. Itachi wouldn't have to massacre his clan, meaning Sasuke wouldn't grow up consumed by vengeance. Instead, Sasuke would grow up in a more stable Uchiha household, mentored not only by his brother, but also by Shisui himself. Imagine Sasuke's Sharingan developing under guidance rather than trauma. Instead of defecting to Orochimaru, Sasuke could become a cornerstone of Konoha's new generation, a powerful ally shaped by trust instead of bitterness. Naruto, too, would benefit from this change. With the Uchiha integrated into the village instead of ostracized, Naruto wouldn't have to grow up in a society poisoned by prejudice and suspicion. His bonds with Sasuke and others would form in a healthier, less antagonistic environment. Shisui's era as Hokage wouldn't be perfect. No era ever is. But his leadership style would lean toward prevention rather than reaction. His policies would aim at addressing root causes of conflict rather than dealing with symptoms. This could drastically alter the course of events like the Chunin exams, the invasion of Konoha, and even the rise of Akatsuki. With Danzo neutralized early, Orochimaru's ambitions might not have been as unchecked. Without the Uchiha massacre, Itachi would never have been forced into Akatsuki, meaning the organization's power would be diminished. Imagine Akatsuki without Itachi's fearsome reputation backing them. It's a much weaker group. And with Shisui aware of threats outside the village, he might have been proactive in countering Akatsuki's moves before they spiraled out of control. Now let's think bigger. With Shisui as Hokage, how would the Fourth Great Ninja War unfold? Or would it even happen at all? Obito's entire plan hinged on exploiting the Uchiha massacre, Itachi's suffering, and Sasuke's descent into darkness. But with Shisui alive, that chain of events shatters. Sasuke wouldn't leave the village, Itachi wouldn't join Akatsuki, and the Uchiha wouldn't be annihilated. That alone erases many of Obito's emotional manipulations. Without Sasuke's hatred fueling conflict, and with Konoha stronger than ever, the Eye of the Moon plan would face significant resistance far earlier. Shisui might even uncover Obito's identity during his rise to Hokage, forcing him out of the shadows long before the war could ever begin. Shisui also carried something Itachi didn't: hope. While Itachi sacrificed himself silently, believing only in pain and tragedy as solutions, Shisui believed in a peaceful compromise. His vision was about coexistence rather than destruction. That vision, magnified by the position of Hokage, could have spread beyond Konoha. He might have inspired other villages to reevaluate their politics, to reduce hostility and suspicion. It's not far-fetched to think that Shisui could have been the first Hokage to truly push the world toward unity, setting the stage for peace without the catastrophic war that followed in the original timeline. However, it's also important to recognize that Shisui's Koto Amatsukami is a dangerous ability. Even with his noble heart, the temptation to use it in politics, to enforce peace by rewriting people's will, could haunt him. That's the moral dilemma of his leadership. Would he truly refrain from using it, or would he justify its use for the greater good? The line between protector and manipulator could blur dangerously, but given Shisui's selflessness, willing to die for peace, it's likely he would use Koto Amatsukami only sparingly, perhaps only once, to permanently prevent another war. So, when we look at this what-if world, the conclusion is striking. Shisui as Hokage would have prevented the Uchiha massacre, dismantled Danzo's root, healed the fractured relationship between clan and village, guided both Itachi and Sasuke down brighter paths, weakened or dismantled Akatsuki early, and potentially prevented the Fourth Great Ninja War. Konoha would emerge stronger, not through dominance, but through unity. His leadership would mark a turning point in shinobi history, one where tragedy wasn't the price of peace, but where peace itself was built through trust, compromise, and wisdom. And yet, the question lingers: would the shinobi world have been ready for such a leader? Could rival villages accept a Hokage who wielded godlike genjutsu? Or would they see him as a threat too great to tolerate? That tension would define Shisui's reign. But one thing is certain: if Shisui had lived to become Hokage, the world of Naruto would be unrecognizable, not defined by cycles of hatred and revenge, but by the possibility of true peace, achieved not through sacrifice, but through vision. If Shisui Uchiha lived long enough to rise as Hokage, the village would have witnessed not only the power of his Sharingan, but also the unmatched strength of his compassion. His era would not be remembered as one of dominance, but as one of delicate balance, between peace and power, between forgiveness and vigilance. With Shisui guiding the village, the Uchiha clan would no longer walk in the shadows of suspicion, but in the open light of trust. The massacre that stained Konoha's history would never happen, and Itachi would not be burdened with the unbearable role of executioner. Instead, he could stand proudly as his brother's ally, a protector of the village, not a secret traitor. And Sasuke? He would grow up with both his brother and clan intact, free from the chains of revenge that once consumed him. Imagine Sasuke not as a boy hardened by hatred, but as a prodigy nurtured in love, striving to surpass his elders not in destruction, but in greatness. Shisui's Hokage tenure would ripple far beyond the clan. With his power of Konoha Matsukami, he could dismantle conspiracies before they bloomed. Danzo's manipulations would falter, his grip over the shadows of the leaf broken by Shisui's unwavering insight. Root would lose its hidden influence, and the village would no longer be plagued by the poison of secrecy. Under Shisui, Konoha would take a new path, transparent, strong, and united. The bonds between clans would deepen, not fracture. The Hyuga, Aburame, Nara, and others would find in Shisui a leader who not only listened, but understood. He would lead not with fear, but with empathy. And this alone would transform the shinobi world. The story of Naruto himself would unfold differently. Without the tragedy of Itachi and Sasuke, Naruto would find in Sasuke not a rival forged by loss, but a rival sharpened by ambition. Their rivalry would be purer, their bond untainted by betrayal. Together they could push each other higher, becoming the pillars of a generation under Shisui's watch. And what of Pain, Obito, and Madara? Their plans would face a village less fractured, less divided. A village not haunted by betrayal, but fortified by unity. Perhaps Nagato's pain would still drive him toward destruction, but Shisui's ability to reach into hearts and bend hatred toward peace could even challenge the cycle of hatred itself. Imagine Shisui standing before Pain, not just as a warrior, but as a mirror, showing him the path he had lost. That confrontation could end not in devastation, but in redemption. The fourth great ninja war would still come, but the pieces on the board would be different. With Shisui's foresight, Obito's deceptions could unravel earlier. The allied shinobi forces would unite under a banner not of desperation, but of confidence. Shisui's genjutsu could turn the tide against the Ten-Tails, bending chaos into strategy. Naruto and Sasuke, fighting side by side without the shadow of revenge, would reach their peak not at the end of war, but in its heart. And when Kaguya emerged, it would not just be the desperate effort of two boys, but the guided strength of a generation led by a Hokage who understood both the light and the darkness within every shinobi soul. But perhaps Shisui's greatest impact would not lie in battles or wars, but in the quiet moments that followed. A Hokage who knew the weight of sacrifice would never let children carry the burdens of their elders. Orphans like Naruto would not grow up alone, shunned by whispers and cold stares. Instead, he would have been embraced by the village much earlier, guided by the hand of a leader who knew too well the cost of loneliness. The cycle of pain that drove so many to vengeance would begin to break, slowly but surely. In this future, peace is not perfect, but it is possible, because Shisui believed in people more than he believed in power. If Shisui Uchiha became Hokage, the shinobi world would not be one free of conflict, but one where conflict was met with compassion, foresight, and unwavering resolve. His reign would echo through generations, not just as a leader who wielded the Sharingan, but as a man who showed that even in a world built on war, true strength comes from trust. And that, perhaps, is the legacy he was always meant to leave behind. If Shisui Uchiha had risen as Hokage, his era would not just be remembered as one of leadership, but as a turning point in the destiny of the Hidden Leaf and the shinobi world itself. His rule would be a story of what it means to balance compassion with power, of how a man burdened by tragedy could still craft hope for future generations. But every reign, no matter how just, faces the ultimate question: does it endure, or does it collapse under the weight of time? To understand this, let us imagine the closing years of Shisui's reign, the conflicts, the legacy, and the unshakable mark he would leave behind. Years into his leadership, Shisui would be faced with the constant evolution of threats. Peace, while precious, is never permanent in the shinobi world. The great villages, though bound by fragile treaties, would continue to test each other, waiting for any sign of weakness. Yet, under Shisui's watch, the leaf would not be seen as weak. He had mastered the art of subtle diplomacy, while still retaining the sharp edge of deterrence. His reputation as both the pacifist Hokage and the man with eyes that see everything would become legendary. Other Kage, even those older and hardened by wars, would tread carefully in his presence, knowing that beneath his calm smile lay a power and foresight few could rival. But with time, challenges within the village itself would rise. Generations shift, ideals evolve, and the young shinobi who grew under Shisui's peaceful reign might not always understand the sacrifices made to keep that peace. There would be debates, arguments in the council chambers, disagreements among the new clan leaders. Some would push for more aggressive expansion, others for complete pacifism. And Shisui, always the bridge between extremes, would once again find himself balancing the scales. Yet with age comes wisdom, and his words, honed by decades of leadership, would often be enough to quell even the most heated disputes. Still, Shisui was human, and like all Hokage, he would one day face his greatest trial, not from outside enemies, but from the relentless march of time. As his body grew older, his Sharingan, once unmatched, would dim. His strength would no longer be what it was in his youth. And so, a new question would emerge. Who succeeds Shisui Uchiha? Who takes the mantle of Hokage after the man who united clans, rewrote history, and gave the village decades of stability? The answer, in this alternate path, would not be simple. For unlike Hiruzen, who had clear successors, Shisui would nurture many potential heirs. Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke Uchiha, even prodigies like Shikamaru or other rising talents of the new age. Each of them would be shaped not by war, but by the ideals Shisui had instilled in them. His legacy would not be one man, but an entire generation raised to believe in balance. And yet, as powerful as his vision was, destiny has a way of testing even the greatest legacies. Imagine now, the shadows of a new threat stirring. An enemy unlike the Akatsuki, unlike Madara, unlike Kaguya herself. A force born from the forgotten corners of the shinobi world. Perhaps remnants of the Otsutsuki clan. Perhaps the rise of radical groups disillusioned by decades of peace. For peace is fragile, and for every soul that flourishes under it, there are others who crave the chaos of conflict. In this twilight of his reign, Shisui would not lead the charge alone. Instead, his greatest strength would shine, his ability to empower others. Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, the next generation of shinobi, they would be the ones to step forward, with Shisui's teachings guiding their every choice. It is here that the true beauty of this alternate timeline becomes clear. Shisui's reign as Hokage would not erase all conflict. It would not prevent every war or tragedy. But what it would do is create a new cycle. one not dominated by hatred or endless vengeance, but by a constant striving for understanding. He would redefine what it meant to be Hokage, no longer just the strongest shinobi, no longer just the political leader, but the moral compass of the village. A beacon, not of perfection, but of intent. His intent to always find the better way, the kinder way, without ever abandoning the strength to defend it. In his final years, the image of Shisui would be unlike any Hokage before him. Not a man remembered solely for his battles, nor just for his sacrifices, but as the Hokage who taught the village, and perhaps the entire shinobi world, that the cycle of hatred could truly be weakened, even if not completely broken. And as he passed on the torch, whether to Naruto, Sasuke, or another worthy successor, his final words would echo a theme that defined his entire life. The trust, even in the darkest times, is the true weapon of a shinobi. Not jutsu, not eyes of power, not weapons or armies, but trust. So, what if Shisui Uchiha became Hokage? The answer is not a simple one. His story would not have been perfect. He would face criticism, betrayal, and challenges from both within and beyond the village. He would struggle, he would falter, and he would rise again. But through it all, he would redefine what it meant to lead. He would carve a legacy of peace not through domination, but through empathy. And perhaps, just perhaps, his path would remind us that the greatest leaders are not those who live forever in power, but those whose ideals live forever in the hearts of those they leave behind. In the end, Shisui's reign as Hokage would not just change the fate of the Hidden Leaf. It would change the fate of the shinobi world. A future not ruled by fear, not chained by the curse of vengeance, but one guided by the faint but unbreakable light of trust. And though history may forever wonder what truly could have been in this vision, Shisui's story is not one of tragedy, but one of hope. A reminder that even in a world built on shadows, there can always be light. Imagine a hidden leaf village where the shadow of war never fully darkens the horizon, where suspicion does not hollow out bonds, and where one man's sacrifice becomes the guiding light for generations. In this alternate timeline, Shisui Uchiha, not Hiruzen Sarutobi, not Tsunade, not even Naruto, wears the mantle of Hokage. And by the time we reach the later years of his reign, the world has shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The will of fire that Shisui inherited burns differently than the others before him. His was a flame of balance, of compromise, of empathy even for one's enemies. Unlike Danzo, who saw shadows as weapons, Shisui saw shadows as bridges, paths through which understanding could be built. And as Hokage, he used those paths to shape alliances that would alter history itself. By the time Naruto and Sasuke are growing into their teenage years, the world is not one teetering on the brink of the Fourth Shinobi World War, but rather one tentatively held together by threads of dialogue and respect. Naruto, instead of growing up with the pain of isolation, grows up knowing that the Hokage has his back, that the man leading the village never looked at him as a vessel for the Nine Tails, but as a boy who deserved love. Shisui makes sure Naruto is mentored early, nurtured, and shown compassion. He cannot erase all the scars of loneliness, but he prevents the deepest ones from ever forming. And Sasuke, whose path in the original timeline was twisted by vengeance and fueled by the massacre of his clan, finds himself walking a very different road. For under Shisui's leadership, the Uchiha are not slaughtered. They are integrated more openly into the village's framework, their pride acknowledged, their loyalty respected, their pain soothed by the fact that one of their own leads the Hidden Leaf. The hatred that festered in Sasuke's heart never takes root in the same way. Instead of longing for revenge, Sasuke grows up longing to surpass his mentor, to prove himself worthy in a world where his clan is alive and respected. But the world does not remain free of threats forever. The Akatsuki still move in the shadows, still hungry for power, still weaving schemes that threaten the balance of the shinobi nations. Yet their plans unfold differently. Without the Uchiha massacre, Itachi is never forced into becoming their double agent. Instead, Itachi serves directly under Shisui, perhaps as his closest advisor, his quiet hand of judgment, his brother in all but blood. This single change alters the trajectory of the Akatsuki's strength. Without Itachi, their dominance is far weaker, their control over events less precise. Shisui knows of them sooner, anticipates their moves, and counters them with a mix of diplomacy and precision strikes. And yet, even as the world feels safer under Shisui's leadership, there is a cost to everything. Peace maintained by a genjutsu master always raises questions. Did people agree with him because they truly believed in his words, or because his eyes had a way of bending perspectives? Did alliances form naturally, or were they nudged ever so slightly by a subtle Sharingan influence? The ambiguity of his power becomes part of his legend, and part of his burden. By the time Naruto reaches his late teens, he is no longer the outcast striving for acknowledgement, but a young man guided by the hand of a mentor Hokage, who believes in him from the beginning. He still dreams of becoming Hokage, but his dream is not born of loneliness. It is born of wanting to carry forward the legacy of Shisui. Naruto learns earlier than in the original story that true strength is not just about fists or jutsu, but about winning hearts. And this lesson, taught through Shisui's example, changes the way Naruto matures. Sasuke, meanwhile, is no enemy to Naruto in this timeline. Their rivalry burns, yes, but it is the healthy rivalry of brothers in arms. Instead of the Valley of the End being the stage for their clash of hatred, it becomes a place of testing, of sparring, of iron sharpening iron. Together they push each other forward side by side, rather than tearing each other down. Their teamwork, under Shisui's watch, becomes something unparalleled. Now imagine the Fourth Shinobi World War, the great battle that shook the world in the original timeline. In this alternate reality, it never unfolds in the same way. The chain of events that led to it, the Akatsuki's manipulation, Obito's descent into darkness, Madara's resurrection, all are slowed, weakened, disrupted. Shisui's leadership means Obito is discovered earlier, confronted not as a phantom, but as a broken man still salvageable from despair. Perhaps Shisui even reaches him, speaking words that pierce through the years of pain, preventing him from fully becoming the monster he was destined to be. The Ten Tails still lurks as a threat. Kaguya's shadow still looms. But when those challenges arise, the world faces them not fractured, not on the brink of collapse, but united. The allied shinobi forces are not a desperate last-minute coalition. They are a network already cultivated by Shisui's diplomacy, by years of weaving the threads of trust between villages. The great nations do not come together in panic. They come together because they have been preparing for this moment all along. Naruto and Sasuke fight side by side not as bitter rivals but as true comrades, their strength amplified by bonds of trust. And when the time comes to seal Kaguya, they do it not with hesitation or bitterness, but with clarity of purpose. The cycle of hatred is broken not by a single battle at the Valley of the End, but by the steady influence of a Hokage who believed that empathy was the sharpest blade. Yet, even as peace settles over the world in the aftermath, the question remains, what does it mean for Naruto? Does he still become Hokage in this timeline, with Shisui alive, strong, and still serving? Naruto's dream evolves. Instead of needing to prove himself through pain, he learns through mentorship. His path to the title is slower, perhaps more thoughtful, but also more stable. He inherits a world already on the path of peace, rather than one teetering on destruction. And in this sense, Naruto's reign, when it comes, begins not with rebuilding, but with growth. The shinobi world becomes something far greater than what it was in the original timeline. The Uchiha thrive, their genius woven into the fabric of the village. The Senju legacy, the Uzumaki resilience, the Hyuga pride, all coexist without the festering wound of distrust. Instead of constant wars shaping generations, a culture of innovation and cooperation begins to blossom. Technology, jutsu, diplomacy, all accelerate under the foundation that Shisui laid. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is this. Shisui, who once sought to sacrifice everything for peace, finds that his true legacy is not in the shadows, not in illusions, not in the silence of death, but in the vibrant voices of a world he helped protect. His genjutsu may have been legendary, but the reality he shaped, the reality of peace, becomes his ultimate masterpiece. In the end, history remembers many Hokage for their battles, for their sacrifices, for the wars they won or lost. But in this timeline, Shisui is remembered for the wars that never happened, for the hatred that never bloomed, for the friendships that never fractured. His era is spoken of as the dawn of something new, the bridge between the blood-stained past and the brighter future. And as Naruto and Sasuke stand side by side in that world looking toward tomorrow, they do so not as broken products of tragedy, but as the proud heirs of a man who dared to dream that even in a world of shinobi, peace was not just an illusion. It was real. It was possible. And it lasted. If Shisui Uchiha had risen to become the Hokage, his legacy would not just be remembered as the man who stopped a civil war, but as the leader who redefined what it meant to carry the will of fire. By the time we reached this point in the timeline, Shisui's impact on the shinobi world would have spread far beyond the borders of Konoha. His leadership, his sacrifice, and his ability to wield power without succumbing to it would set a new standard for generations to come. But what would this final stage of his story look like? How would history remember him? And perhaps the most important question, would his idealistic vision truly endure, or would it eventually fade away, tested by the harsh realities of the shinobi world? As Hokage, Shisui's philosophy had always been clear. He believed that peace could only be achieved by understanding, that strength must always serve compassion, and that true unity was forged not by fear or manipulation, but by trust. This was not an easy path to walk. Other Hokage often questioned his willingness to compromise, some even mistaking it for weakness. Yet, time and again, Shisui proved them wrong. His Sharingan allowed him to see the battlefield like no other, but his heart allowed him to see the people behind the weapons. That duality, the warrior and the peacemaker, became the core of his reign. The 5 great nations, long scarred by war, found in Shisui a leader who refused to let history repeat itself. He brokered peace not only through treaties, but by reshaping the very culture of Konoha. He opened the academy to foreign students, allowing the next generation of shinobi to grow up alongside one another, forming bonds before they could ever be enemies. He encouraged joint missions between villages, And slowly, very slowly, the idea of an interconnected shinobi world began to take root. But with every new idea came resistance. Some within Konoha whispered that Shisui's kindness would one day destroy the village, that his refusal to play the traditional game of power would make them vulnerable. The elders in particular often clashed with him. Yet Shisui's calm, his ability to disarm arguments with both logic and sincerity, often left them with no ground to stand on. He did not rule with an iron fist, but with a quiet strength that made it clear he could bend, but never break. As the years passed, the shinobi world entered a strange era of balance. There were still threats: rogue shinobi, underground organizations, remnants of clans clinging to hatred. But none of them managed to spark the kind of all-out wars that once consumed nations. The fear of another great shinobi war slowly receded into memory. And for the first time in generations, children grew up believing that perhaps the world they lived in would be kinder than the one their parents endured. Yet Shisui himself carried the heavy burden of knowing that peace was never permanent. He often spoke about it, how even a single spark of hatred could reignite flames that had taken decades to smother. And so, he devoted himself to training the next generation of leaders, ensuring that his ideals would not die with him. Among these young shinobi, Naruto Uzumaki shone the brightest. Unlike in the original timeline, where Naruto grew up desperate for recognition, under Shisui's Hokage leadership, Naruto found mentorship and belonging early on. He was guided, not just in power, but in character, molded to understand that being Hokage was not about being the strongest, but about carrying the weight of everyone's future. It is here that Shisui's true legacy began to crystallize. For while his reign was remembered as peaceful, what truly mattered was how he planted seeds for what came after. Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, and countless others, all of them were shaped by his hand, directly or indirectly. Even those outside Konoha felt his influence. Gaara of the Sand, for instance, no longer became the weaponized child of war he once was. Instead, he encountered Konoha not as an enemy, but as an ally. Bonds formed earlier, scars healed sooner, and an entire generation was spared the loneliness and trauma that had once defined them. But let's imagine further, because even with all his wisdom, Shisui was still human. He still had doubts, fears, and limits. As he aged, the pressures of leadership weighed on him. He wondered often if he had done enough, if the peace he built would survive him. In the quiet of the Hokage's office, late at night, he would gaze out over the village lights and ask himself the question every Hokage eventually faced. Was his way the right way? Or had he simply delayed the inevitable conflict? The answer perhaps lay not in what he accomplished, but in what he inspired. For Shisui was never a man who sought monuments or recognition. His dream was simple: to ensure that no one had to endure the kind of division, mistrust, and bloodshed that once tore his clan and his village apart. And in that regard, he succeeded. His Uchiha heritage, once seen as a curse, became a symbol of balance. He bridged the gap that no one before him could bridge, turning the clan's legacy from one of suspicion to one of pride. The cycle of mistrust that had consumed his people for decades finally ended under his rule. And so, when Shisui's time eventually came to an end, history remembered him not just as the Hokage who brought peace, but as the man who proved that compassion and strength were not opposites, but partners. His funeral, unlike any before, was not marked by grief alone. It was marked by gratitude. Villages far and wide sent representatives, not out of obligation, but out of respect, for they knew that the stability they now enjoyed was born of his vision. But here's the twist. True legacies are not measured by statues or ceremonies. They are measured by whether the world carries on the dream once the dreamer is gone. And Shisui's world did. Naruto, Sasuke, and countless others inherited not just his techniques, but his heart. They carried forward his ideals, adapting them to their own journeys, ensuring that his influence never faded. Even decades later, shinobi would look back at Shisui's reign as a turning point in history, the moment the cycle of hatred truly began to break. Now, imagine how different everything would be compared to the original timeline. No Pain invasion destroying Konoha. No fourth great shinobi war tearing the nations apart. No chain of endless vengeance leading to destruction. Instead, a world where the greatest battles were not fought between villages, but within hearts, fighting to maintain the peace that Shisui worked so hard to protect. And maybe, just maybe, that was always his greatest gift. Not the genjutsu of Kotoa Matsukami, not the mastery of the Sharingan, but the belief that shinobi could be more than tools of war, that they could be guardians of peace, that they could choose kindness even when the world demanded violence. So in the end, what if Shisui Uchiha became Hokage? The answer is this. The shinobi world would not only have avoided countless tragedies, it would have discovered a new path forward. A path where power served love, where leadership meant sacrifice, and where even the cursed eyes of the Uchiha became symbols of hope. Because sometimes, it takes just one person with an unshakable vision to change the course of history forever. And Shisui was that person. The story now moves into a realm where silence speaks louder than words, where every pause in the narration is heavy with meaning, and where the rhythm of life itself becomes the backdrop for the unfolding events. The camera glides over a horizon soaked in twilight, the fading sun painting the world in shades of amber and deep indigo. A gentle wind moves across empty streets, carrying echoes of laughter that once filled these places, now replaced by quiet anticipation. The voice enters softly, deliberate, each word carefully placed as though carving meaning into stone. Every step the characters take now feels weighted, as if the earth beneath them remembers their choices. The past is no longer a distant shadow. It walks alongside them, whispering reminders of what was lost and what is still at stake. Yet, within this tension lies the quiet beauty of resilience, the simple act of moving forward even when the path is uncertain. The voiceover does not rush. It lingers, letting silence seep in, inviting the listener to imagine themselves standing there, breathing in the same air, seeing the same fragile light. Time has begun to stretch differently here. Seconds feel like hours, moments fold into one another, and the boundaries between memory and present reality blur. The narrative speaks of endurance, of how ordinary people become extraordinary simply by choosing not to break. Their strength is not loud or celebrated with grand gestures, but instead revealed in small decisions. The choice to rise again after falling, to keep faith when everything suggests otherwise, to carry kindness even when surrounded by cruelty. These choices, repeated endlessly, shape destinies more than any single heroic act. And as the lens shifts, the audience is invited into a deeper space within themselves. What does it mean to endure? What does it mean to hope? These questions echo quietly as the script unfolds, not demanding answers but stirring reflection. The pacing is steady, hypnotic, like the sound of waves against a distant shore. Each sentence flows into the next, creating a rhythm that feels both natural and inevitable, as though the story could not be told any other way. The characters do not speak much now. Their silence is eloquent. A hand extended, a glance exchanged, a shoulder leaned upon. These gestures speak volumes more than words could. The voiceover becomes the interpreter of these silences, giving language to what cannot be said aloud. It reminds the listener that sometimes the greatest truths are unspoken, existing only in the space between people. The landscape itself becomes a character. Crumbling buildings, faded billboards, patches of wildflowers pushing through cracks in the pavement. Each detail tells its own story of survival. The camera lingers on these images, and the narration draws connections. Just as nature reclaims what is broken, so too do human beings find ways to heal. Not by erasing scars, but by carrying them forward as part of their identity. The scars become maps, guiding them to who they are meant to be. As the script continues, the tension builds, but never explodes. It is a slow burn, a steady climb toward something just out of sight. The audience feels it, the sense that change is coming, that the quiet persistence of these lives will soon intersect with forces larger than themselves. And yet, the narration insists on staying grounded in the present moment. It describes the way light falls on a cracked window, the sound of footsteps echoing down an empty hall, the warmth of a shared meal between those who have little to give. These details matter because they remind the audience that even in the midst of struggle, beauty endures. The voice grows stronger now, more insistent, as if urging both characters and listeners alike not to forget the power of choice. Every ending, it says, is written in the small decisions we make today. The words resonate, sinking deep, echoing like a mantra. The narrative stretches these thoughts across long passages, weaving imagery and emotion together until the listener is completely immersed. And just when it feels almost too heavy, the script offers moments of levity, small sparks of humor, brief flashes of joy. A child's laughter carried on the wind, a shared smile over something trivial, the comfort of knowing that even in darkness, light can still be found. These moments are not distractions, they are lifelines, reminders that hope is not only necessary, but possible. Turn on. The journey of this section is not toward a resolution, but toward understanding. It is about recognizing that the struggles faced by these characters are universal, reflections of the battles within each of us. The voiceover brings this home gently, never preaching, but simply inviting the audience to feel, to pause, to breathe, to remember that they too are part of this ongoing story. And so, as we bring this chapter to a close, we are reminded that the story is far from over. Every idea shared, every challenge faced, and every vision imagined is a seed planted for tomorrow. The future is not waiting somewhere ahead. It is being written here and now, in the choices we make and the courage we show. The journey continues, and with it, the promise of what we can become together.